Think back to when you were a kid, either waking up early on a Saturday morning or coming home from school late in the afternoon. What's one aspect of the routine that sticks out to you? For me and many other fans of cartoons, I'm sure it was the programming blocks that filled the channels when we were growing up. Whether it was Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, or a local station in your area, there was something special about these that made us kids tune in whenever they were on. And it wasn't just about the shows either. Sure, the shows helped in keeping us interested, but in a lot of cases, the blocks themselves were the main event. The characters who would host and bumpers that filled the commercial breaks. The entire concept was like a show within a show, and some of my best memories watching TV as a kid come from the variety of different blocks I watched back in the day. What's more is that we don't really see this kind of thing anymore, and if we do, it's certainly not to the extent it used to be. I want to go back in time to rediscover some of the programming blocks that went off the air long ago, and in some cases, even have lost media relating to them. Maguzi. When you think about all the programming blocks that defined Cartoon Network over the years, I'm sure the likes of Toonami, Cartoon Fridays, and maybe even CN Real, for better or worse, would be on that list. However, there are so many other blocks that were either short-lived or ended up being forgotten for their lack of popularity. To me, Maguzi fits this definition perfectly. An afternoon block of shows that premiered in 2004, featuring an underwater theme with alien characters. When I see most people talk about this block, the first thing they say is how much they dislike it for how it replaced Toonami in the old weekday time slot. But I never grew up with Toonami on the weekdays, and Maguzi was something I actually watched quite often. The feel of the block was pretty nice, with the characters being more cartoony and the variety of shows that aired being pretty large. While Toonami mostly aired anime, Maguzi mostly aired action cartoons like Megas XLR, Robot Boy, and Code Lyoko, along with a couple anime series like Pokemon. This was a block I remember watching really often, and the fact that these shows were less episodic than that of anime made it really easy to catch every now and then. Though, I do remember the schedule being a little inconsistent at times, where they'd show several episodes of something like Code Lyoko, so if you weren't in the mood to watch it that day, then you'd be out of luck. Despite this, the alien characters were always fun to watch, and there were plenty of different bumpers featuring them hanging out. There was even a contest for fans to design a new alien that would join the rest of the cast, with the winner being Yoke. New bumpers and animations were made to include him until the block was discontinued entirely in 2007, when it was replaced by Master Control. Maguzi had a pretty good run, and considering it didn't have the big premieres like Toonami did, you have to appreciate how creative it was and the identity it had. Cubo. Similar to Maguzi and a lot of the other blocks we'll be looking at in this video, they've hit a level of nostalgia for how long ago they were airing and how many years it's been since their cancellation. It's not often that we find a really old programming block that hung on for as long as it did, and for that reason, its cancellation hits a little harder. Cubo was a programming block as well as its own channel that aired from 2006 to 2021 and featured a lot of children's programming that really became cult classics. 321 Penguins, Willa's Wildlife, The Mysteries of Alfred Hedgehog, and my favorite, Pecola. I briefly remember coming across this channel when I was younger, but had no interest in it at the time, so it wouldn't be until the late 2010s when I came across it again. There were dozens of other shows that the block aired, and from what I remember, the schedule had pretty good variety, so I often found myself leaving it on in the background, which was nice, especially since I didn't have cable at the time. Pecola aired for an hour starting at 8 p.m. every night, so that was the one show I made sure to watch. After midnight, Cubo ran a block within itself, called Night Owl, which mostly showed old 80s cartoons like Masters of the Universe. Even though Cubo might not seem as popular as something that would air on a main cartoon channel, when it was announced in early 2021 that the channel would be closing down completely, a lot of people were sad to see it go. This closure was the result of Ion Media and all of its channels being sold to EW Scripps Company, and unfortunately, it was decided to discontinue Cubo. There was some discussion on the Lost Media Wiki forums about whether or not there would be any Cubo Lost Media as a result, but it seems like there isn't too much. Bumpers and promos are the most common piece of media that becomes lost, but there are still massive searches for this kind of thing even from the big networks. I think the greatest loss in Cubo being discontinued is the fact that such an old programming block made it so far into the modern television age, but just wasn't able to survive it. You Pick Live. I gotta be honest with you guys, when it comes to the blocks of Cartoon Network compared to the blocks of Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network wins by a landslide. There have been so many memorable and iconic blocks that Cartoon Network has aired over the years. A lot of them feel almost immortal. In comparison, I can't really think of any Nickelodeon blocks that have stayed with me all these years later, and even discovering some of them nowadays don't even have that great of an appeal. However, there was one block from Nick that I do remember watching pretty often, and the gimmick behind it was really fun to play along with. Originally, this block was called You Pick Fridays and was hosted by Henry and June from Kablam. However, it was eventually rebranded and called You Pick Live, a late afternoon block of shows that aired daily from the early to mid-2000s. It was made up of two different components. One was the cartoons, which were the bulk of the block, and then the live-action parts performed by the hosts, as smaller segments in between. There were a lot of inside jokes and recurring characters, like Pick-Boy, which added to the entertainment value. But most notably, the block was special for one reason. It allowed viewers at home to go online to the Nickelodeon website and vote for which shows they wanted to see aired that day. Unfortunately, I was too young to be going online and figuring all that out at the time, but I do remember waiting for the results on TV. Not only that, but there were some other kinds of online polls too, which would change some of the show's components. Apparently, there was one poll which kicked Pick-Boy off the show for the rest of the season, which sounds like a great meme. For such a fun concept and daily voting, I was wondering why it was cancelled after only being aired for 3 years, and according to the Nickelodeon wiki, it was over expired contracts, of which Nick didn't want to continue the show with new hosts. As far as I can tell, nothing really replaced it, and only a handful of recordings still exist online. I really wanted to watch the segment where Pick-Boy gets kicked off the show, but couldn't find it, so there's probably a lot of content from this block that hasn't been documented. If you recorded Nickelodeon on VHS tapes back in the early to mid-2000s, you might find some You Pick Live lost media. 4Kids TV. If you grew up in the 2000s like I did, then I'm sure you have some memories of waking up on Saturday morning to watch Saturday morning cartoons. This was a pretty big thing back in the day, and the Saturday morning time slot became just as competitive as the after-school block and prime time. There was something special about waking up early and turning on the TV to catch new episodes. In a way, it's what kick-started the weekend for me, and was how I started my Saturday. However, if you were really young in the 2000s, there's a pretty good chance you either don't remember or never even watched Saturday morning cartoons in this way, since the format died out in the early 2010s, and there hasn't really been anything nowadays that compares. Thinking about new episodes of Sonic X, Kirby Right Back Atcha, and One Piece is pretty unbelievable, but this is exactly what I watched back in the day on the classic programming block called 4Kids TV. This block aired on the CW and ran throughout the 2000s. Originally, 4Kids TV was called the Fox Box in the early 2000s, which is when I first started watching. This iteration of the block didn't have as many shows as it would eventually acquire, with Ultimate Muscle and Kirby being the only two I was interested in at the time. However, once they changed their name to 4Kids TV, they would eventually pick up many more, like Cubix, One Piece, Viva Pinata, and Sonic X, which became my favorite. I watched this block every week and I would always make sure to catch Sonic X. 4Kids also did a great job with bumpers and branding, once again, making it feel like you were part of a special event, and sometimes they even ran contests. While I don't remember ever entering them, they did advertise the website a lot, which I made my way to a couple times. Despite these golden years for the block, it would eventually decrease in quality as they acquired more shows which either felt cheap or were specifically marketed towards girls. Eventually, the block was rebranded as Toonami and drastically reduced its programming, though somehow managed to pick up Dragon Ball Z Kai. I didn't have any other way to watch the series at that point, so I actually made an effort to watch the show every week. Despite this, the series didn't run for too long, and reruns seemed to start airing on weeks when a new episode was expected, so eventually I lost interest, and not long after that, Toonami shut down. I've read that Toonami actually became Vortex, which sounds really familiar, but I can't remember if it ever aired in my area. I definitely had lost interest in Saturday morning cartoons at that point, so if it did, I hardly ever saw it. Vortex only ran for 2 years until it was discontinued, at which point all the Saturday morning cartoons were pretty much gone. While I think 4Kids TV had a pretty sad demise, when you think about the way it ended up for those years in between when I was a viewer of the block, it really stands out to me as some of the best television I ever watched growing up. Cartoon Planet. The early 2010s were a really interesting time on Cartoon Network, as it was largely the era when their old content was phased out and a new standard was set. This can be seen by the likes of Chowder, Flapjack, and Toonami being phased out, and Adventure Time, Regular Show, and Gumball being brought in. It was a real change of direction, and it actually took me a long time to accept at first. For this reason, I'd always watch new episode premieres and follow press releases to gain as much insight about the channel as possible, and then make videos that criticized the direction they were headed. I was a big Cartoon Network viewer a few years prior, and I didn't like seeing all the changes happen at once. So you can probably guess that I was really happy to see a block called Cartoon Planet air on the channel in 2012. This block wasn't actually a new creation. Its original form aired in the mid to late 90s, so this was a reboot of sorts. Originally, the block was hosted by Space Ghost, with programming that consisted of old Hanna-Barbera shows, along with skits of the hosts making jokes and talking with each other. And in the 2012 reboot, this format pretty much remained the same. Brak and Zorak took on the hosting duties instead of Space Ghost, and the Hanna-Barbera cartoons were replaced with cartoons, like Dexter's Lab, Johnny Bravo, and Courage the Cowardly Dog. It premiered on March 30th, 2012, which was a Friday, and instantly, this became the kickoff to the weekend. These shows weren't airing on the channel at all during this era, and streaming wasn't really a great option back then either, so I enjoyed catching the classics condensed into an hour block. The Brak segments were really funny, and it's that overall packaging of the show that made it feel really special. Unfortunately, that didn't last for long, because the block only ran for 2 years before it was cancelled, and during the course of that time, its air cycle wasn't great either. Repeats were frequent, it was taken off the Friday night time slot, and I don't even remember seeing a single commercial advertising its premiere. The nostalgia I have for the block is huge, but it goes without saying that it was poorly managed, which seemed so common with Cartoon Network at the time. Toonami Jetstream. While this next entry isn't quite a programming block, I really wanted to talk about Toonami in some way for this video, and considering the topic was advertised a lot on Toonami itself, I'm going to count it. If you were an active Toonami viewer in the later years of its original Cartoon Network iteration, then you might remember seeing advertisements for Toonami Jetstream, an online website that focused on streaming episodes. While this idea might not seem like a big deal nowadays, when it launched in 2006, it was pretty cool to be able to access Toonami content online for free. The site built up a large collection of shows over the years, including many that were on the block itself, like Naruto, Dragon Ball, and Pokemon, but also had many exclusive debuts of series that couldn't be seen anywhere else at the time. The Prince of Tennis and Mare were two of these series, and proved to be so popular online they were eventually added to the main Toonami lineup, which is actually where I remember first seeing them. I had heard about Toonami Jetstream for a while, but it wasn't until later that I had an internet connection and was able to check it out. Unfortunately, by that time, it was around 2007 and the website wasn't doing so well, with most of the series I had heard about just not being there anymore. Some Toonami series, like Bobobo and One Piece, never even made it online to my knowledge, and shortly after Toonami was cancelled in late 2008, Jetstream was suddenly closed in early 2009. I'm sure this had to do with Toonami's cancellation itself, but also how many of those same series were getting DVD releases at the time, which probably made the website feel even more unnecessary. Despite this increased accessibility, which Jetstream seemed to limit, it's too bad they didn't keep it around for longer, as I still feel like I missed out on a cool extension of a programming block I love so much. Cartoon Network Monday Nights. Earlier, I stated that Cartoon Network in the early 2010s was a really interesting time for how different it was compared to the previous years, and that also includes the programming blocks. With the exception of Cartoon Planet, most of what Cartoon Network put together at the time was new, and in some ways straight to the point. This could be seen with the relatively short-lived Friday Night Action block, but more importantly, the Monday Night Comedies block, or Monday Nights for short. This block was one of the most important blocks to Cartoon Network's new direction in the early 2010s, and it was used to debut new episodes of their new shows, including Adventure Time, Regular Show, Robotomy, Problem Solvers, and Secret Mountain Fort Awesome. While some of these shows became hits and others left the air pretty quickly, it was still a big draw of the channel and ran in this format for several years. Regular Show was one of the cartoons I really enjoyed watching in its earlier seasons, so I would frequently tune in to catch the new episodes. The block loosely ran from 7:30 p.m. to 10 p.m., but the big premieres were usually in the 8 to 9 hour, so that was the best time to watch. Sometimes, shows like Robotomy and Problem Solvers would air in the earlier slots when they were new, but got demoted to the later time slots before being cancelled. But I would often watch these too. I know people really don't like Problem Solvers and Secret Mountain Fort Awesome, but I didn't think they were that bad when they premiered. I read that shows like Steven Universe and Clarence had runs on the block as well, but I stopped watching it around 2013 when I lost cable. So to me, the earliest iteration of the block will always be the most memorable. Ready, Set, Learn. I'll bet there's a pretty high chance most people out there don't know what CW4Kids is or the Ready, Set, Learn block, but one image might help you remember. And it's this penguin. Does it ring any bells yet? This is Paz the Penguin, who had his own cartoon on Ready, Set, Learn, as well as hosted the block itself in the form of a puppet. As the name implies, this was loosely an educational programming block, more than the likes of what you'd see on Cartoon Network, for example. I honestly don't remember a whole lot from this block off the top of my head, as I must have watched it when I was pretty small, but I do recognize a handful of the shows by reading from a list, which include Pappyland, High Five, and Animal Jam. These shows and dozens more aired throughout the course of the block from 1992 to 2010, lasting for nearly 2 decades and on 2 different channels. One iteration started on TLC in 1992, and the other on Discovery Kids in 1996, though I have no idea which channel I would have seen it on. I'm pretty sure it only aired early in the morning as well, so that made it more difficult to watch. When the block came to an end in 2010, it wasn't discontinued entirely, but rebranded as The Hub, which I do remember hearing about in passing several years ago. Though, to my surprise, The Hub has apparently been discontinued as well, and rebranded as Discovery Family. It doesn't look like any of the old shows are being aired, and a lot of content from the past show is still missing, which includes several animated segments and puppet segments. I'm not even sure if some of the lesser known shows like Pappyland were even released on home media in their entirety, so looking closer at Ready Set Learn's content is sure to reveal more lost media. Henry and June 101% Spooky Whizbang. There's kind of been a running theme with every block I've talked about here, and maybe it applies to the entire topic of this video as well. That immersive feeling you get when watching a programming block. It's about the shows, the segments in between, the hosts, and the combination of them all, which makes it so entertaining. And if a programming block can give you those feelings without having even watched it before, then you know it's something special. This is exactly how I describe Henry and June's 101% Spooky Whizbang, a Halloween block that aired from mid-September to early November 1999. This was one of those after-school programming blocks in that it aired during the afternoons and played a variety of Halloween-themed Nicktoons. However, the coolest and most notable feature of this block are Henry and June, who act as the hosts by appearing in short segments between each cartoon and commercial break. There's actually an entire search that was formed around trying to find these segments, since they feel like they were taken straight from Kablam. They talk to each other, announce the upcoming shows, and even break the fourth wall in plenty of different environments, which really makes the block feel alive. I wish more of these segments were found, but unfortunately, we only have a handful archived, with the majority of them being lost. It's way more effort than I would have expected from a programming block, and it's too bad I wasn't watching Nickelodeon in 1999 to see this on TV. But once I discovered its existence, I wish I had, which makes watching it an experience, and that's a powerful creative tool that we don't see at all anymore. I don't really have the means or time to watch Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon on TV like I used to, but I've caught quite a few hours of it over the past few years, and it's nothing like I remember it. There are no blocks and hardly any transitions between shows. Everything is so minimalist. It goes to show that the effort put into a block, or channel for that matter, isn't the same as it used to be decades ago. Toonami and The Splat are the only two blocks I can still give credit to, but in some ways those are made to represent a time of the past. We really don't see creativity in programming blocks anymore, but maybe that's what makes looking back on the older ones so special. The memories of waking up early to watch Sonic X, or hanging out at home on a Friday night and seeing the Cartoon Network classics. I'm glad that the majority of these blocks are remembered and documented, and even though they're long gone, it's still fun searching for their bits of lost media and keeping their legacy alive. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to check out some of my other game-related lost media videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Finn.